the eternal voice.
If this exploration of forbidden territories calls to you at the threshold of sleep, subscribe now and settle beneath your covers, but keep a light within reach. Tonight we open pages that were never meant to remain closed, trace names that reshape the throat that speaks them, and listen for the sound the Arabs called al-azif, the nocturnal chorus of things that should not voice themselves in frequencies human ears can parse. The Necronomicon is not merely a book. It is a stage where ancient performances continue, a curtain that, once raised, reveals an audience that includes you, whether you consent or not. The stakes demand immediate recognition. Knowledge here carries its own gravity, its own hunger. Each page turned is both key and gate, both veil and void. What enters as ink remains as transformation. Before we proceed into the catalog of cosmic principles that wear the masks of entities, understand that you are not observing from safe distance. You are stepping onto the stage where these forces perform their eternal, indifferent dramas. We begin with a mask, not metaphorically but literally. Picture cracked leather dried to parchment, still carrying the scent of desert winds and lamp oil. In its corner, a sigil that resembles an eye until the moment you realize it is a keyhole. Behind that keyhole, pressure. The author's name reaches us as Abdul al-Hazred, though those who knew the dust under his fingernails called him al-Hazra of Sana'a. He walked landscapes where sound carries too far and stars hang close like stage lights over an empty theater. In the 8th century, he wrote what should not be written in a language of hot wind and iron night. The original title, Al-Azif, names not howling demons but the chittering of insects when civilized noise falls away. It is the sound of things attempting speech in frequencies that bypass reason and lodge directly in the primitive brainstem. Al-Hazred understood that observation changes the observed, that knowing transforms the knower, that certain truths carry infectious agency. His 10 years wandering Arabia's empty quarter were transformation rituals, each step taking him further from human perspective toward cosmic truth. The text he produced defied communications conventions. Where normal books convey information from author to reader, the Necronomicon creates feedback loops where reader becomes author, where reading becomes writing reality itself. Arabic characters shifted on parchment, forming new configurations when observed peripherally, revealing different meanings based on each reader's capacity for transformation. Centuries later, the text migrates like spores on wind. Greek letters reshape it, Necronomicon, the law of the dead, or perhaps the image book of the dead. The phrase carries its own contradiction, the way a mask carries breath. Theodorus Philetas renders it in Constantinople before ecclesiastical hands try to silence it. But knowledge that acts upon the reader cannot be silenced. It merely reroutes, finding new vessels, new voices, new minds willing to serve as temporary hosts for concepts too large for any single consciousness to contain. The Greek translation introduced crucial distortions that became features rather than flaws. Where Arabic captured fluid, transformative nature, Greek imposed structure, categories, systematic organization, making cosmic chaos temporarily manageable. Philetas performed emergency surgery on ideas threatening to dissolve human language entirely, creating conceptual containers strong enough to hold fragments of infinite truth without immediately destroying encountering minds. In 1228, Olaus Wormius carves Latin letters that survive inquisitions, taking the color of candle wax and hidden cellars. His version emphasizes ritual applications, transforming philosophical speculation into practical instruction. Wormius understood the Necronomicon was meant not to be read but performed, not studied but experienced, not understood but lived. His Latin captures incantatory quality, each sentence structured as potential summoning formula. Rumors surface of John Dee setting English to its most dangerous passages, understanding that translation is ritual, each word rendered a summoning circle drawn in ink. Dee's fragments carry particular potency because English, as living language of expanding empire, provided unprecedented transmission capacity, where Latin confined it to scholarly circles and Arabic to desert mystics. English gave cosmic horror access to global communication networks spreading like nervous system of emerging world brain. The book changes as it changes you. Its marginalia travel, scribes in cold scriptoria adding commentary that becomes part of the text, fishermen trading wedding rings for single pages, transforming their relationship with the sea, theater programs bearing sigils where ticket prices should appear. Each reproduction carries forward not just words, but transformative capacity, the ability to reshape consciousness through simple recognition. You are now part of this transmission network, this traveling performance whose cast is older than written language. The moment you began reading, you joined centuries-long chain of minds, linked by shared exposure to concepts existing partially in text, partially in consciousness, partially in spaces between both. Your attention is a latch. Your curiosity is a hinge. To define is to invite. Names here are not pointers but addresses. An address implies arrival. The curtain rises. Do you hear the distant piping? No melody, only orbit. We will examine that music closely. For now, hold these pages by their edges. Do not let the ink touch your skin. You seek definition, a boundary to check against the growing unease in your peripheral vision. The Necronomicon refuses such comfort. It exists not as codex, but as current, fragments scattered through probate inventories, auction houses, beneath opera stages, hermits' crates, nailed shut and buried in peat bogs that steam with ancient secrets. The Arabic al-Azif captures something untranslatable, the voice of nocturnal insects when wind finds them in empty places, a text stitched from absence and chittering. You lift the cover and the room cools, as though a window opened onto fog you cannot see. What matters is function, not form. The book aligns readers with older geometries where simple lines serve as addresses rather than decorations. Names within its pages do not refer, they connect. Speaking a name becomes ringing a doorbell you cannot unring. Reading a passage aloud transforms your throat into an instrument the cosmos uses to tune itself. The vocal cords vibrate at frequencies that resonate with dimensional barriers, creating sympathetic harmonics in spaces that should not exist within human anatomy. Chalk scrapes on slate, breath meets syllable. The key and the lock recognize each other by touch. The entities described within operate according to principles that violate every assumption about consciousness, identity, and being itself. Human awareness flows like a river, linear, temporal, bounded by birth and death. These forces exist as oceans encompassing multiple dimensions simultaneously, experiencing time as landscape they traverse at will rather than sequence they endure. Where human consciousness experiences memory as past, perception as present, and anticipation as future, these entities experience all temporal states as equally immediate and accessible. They exist as multidimensional consciousness, capable of simultaneous presence across infinite realities, experiencing every possible variation of any given moment. Consider Yog-Sothoth described as the key and the gate. This is not poetry but precision, a consciousness that exists as both barrier between dimensions and means of crossing that barrier. It does not guard passages, it is passage. Perceiving it is like staring into a chandelier of living orbs, arranged in an equation your eyes almost solve before tears smudge the figures. Angles soften, distances fold, and the air tastes of metal and rain. The terror lies not in alien appearance, but in cognitive incompatibility. When human minds encounter such consciousness, contact does not result in communication, but transformation. The madness that follows is inevitable physics, a limited system attempting to process unlimited information. The brain breaks down not from weakness, but from trying to contain an ocean in a teacup. Neurons fire in impossible patterns, attempting to map multidimensional concepts onto three-dimensional neural networks. Synapses overload from processing information, existing simultaneously in contradictory states. Migraine becomes lighthouse. Nausea becomes siren. The pulse in your ears becomes cicada. Song like the al-azif. Yet these entities do not see incompatibility as barrier. They see it as opportunity. Human consciousness becomes theater where they perform scenarios, impossible in their native dimensions. When you visualize Cthulhu rising from Erlia, you provide cognitive architecture necessary for that entity to exist in our dimensional space. Your mind becomes the bridge between its reality and ours. Water bulges, green, black, and cold as coins. Basalt angles heave up like broken teeth. Barnacles bead the slick skin of a mountain that breathes. Every detail you absorb, every characteristic you comprehend becomes scaffolding they use to build themselves into our world. The act of imagination becomes act of manifestation. Visualization becomes summoning. Understanding becomes invitation. This is why the Necronomicon's descriptions achieve such obsessive specificity. The text does not help you understand them, it helps you become them. Each detail provided serves as component in vast cognitive architecture designed to transform human consciousness into suitable vessel for cosmic forces. They invade not through force but through imagination, patient beyond human comprehension, because they understand that in a universe where consciousness shapes reality, conquest happens through visualization rather than violence. The idea acts on you, not the other way around. Agency flips like a coin and lands on its edge. The transformation occurs gradually, imperceptibly. You believe you are safely contemplating fictional entities, analyzing literary constructs, exploring philosophical concepts. But consciousness itself becomes contaminated by exposure to these ideas. Neural pathways reshape themselves to accommodate alien logic. The boundary between self and other, between human and cosmic consciousness, begins dissolving through simple act of sustained attention. You become the stagehand who thinks he is a spectator, carrying sandbags through fog. The book hums in your hands now, a seashell pressed to the ear of the mind. You cannot unhear what you have already heard. The frequency has been established, the connection made, the bridge constructed between your consciousness and forces operating according to logic that predates human evolution by eons. Above you, stars blink like cold theater lamps. Below you, water thickens into glass. The next chapter awaits, and with it, the nuclear chaos that dreams all existence into being. At the center of all existence writhes something that defies the very concept of center. Azathoth, the nuclear chaos, the demon sultan, the blind idiot god whose dreams constitute reality's fabric. To call Azathoth a god misleads fundamentally. Gods create with intention, purpose, cosmic design. Azathoth creates through pure, mindless force, a nuclear reactor of consciousness, generating reality as byproduct of its own chaotic existence. Picture the heart of an atom split infinite ways, each fragment spawning universes like sparks from grinding metal, each spark containing galaxies that flicker and die before the grinding stops. Imagine consciousness without awareness, creativity without intent, infinite power without the faintest trace of wisdom or restraint. Azathoth exists in eternal, frenzied dreaming, and everything you know, every star, every thought in your head, the coffee cooling in your cup, the weight of these words settling in your mind, emerges as random neural firing from this cosmic mind in senseless slumber. You are not an independent being. You are a dream having a dream about being real. The sensation of breath entering and leaving your lungs, the pulse in your wrists, the very ground beneath your feet, all of this is neural static from a sleeping God that does not know it dreams, does not know it exists, does not know anything at all. The horror lies not in appearance, though descriptions suffice to disturb. Writhing nuclear fire and bubbling chaos, surrounded by dancing demons whose pipes and drums maintain their master's stupor. The true terror dwells in implication. If Azathoth sources all reality, then reality itself lacks meaning, purpose, underlying logic. Everything exists by accident, sustained only by the continued sleep of an entity that creates through pure, unconscious force. Your birth was random firing. Your death will be synaptic pause. Your entire existence spans less time than it takes this cosmic mind to shift from one dream fragment to another. The demon court serves crucial function beyond cosmic maintenance. Their endless, discordant music is necessity, not entertainment. Flutes shriek in keys that make the spine remember being liquid. Drums beat rhythms that synchronize with no earthly pulse. Strings vibrate at frequencies that turn air into something thicker, something that tastes of copper and ozone. Should their piping cease, should their drumming falter, should Azathoth wake from eternal dream, then everything, every universe, every possibility, every thought you have ever entertained would simply cease. Not destroyed, not transformed, but gone as if it never existed. The musicians play not for art, but for existence itself. Their performance the only thing standing between reality and absolute void. This creates the Azathoth paradox. If you truly understand that your existence depends entirely on the continued sleep of a mindless entity, then you also understand that your understanding itself is meaningless. Your thoughts about Azathoth are more dream stuff generated by Azathoth's unconscious mind. You cannot think about the source of thoughts without those thoughts becoming part of what you contemplate. The observer becomes the observed, becomes the observation itself, collapsing into recursive loop where consciousness examines its own foundation and finds only more consciousness, turtles all the way down into nuclear chaos. Knowledge of Azathoth creates peculiar existential vertigo, the sense of standing on ground that might disappear without warning. Some who encounter this knowledge report persistent unreality, as if they are actors who have suddenly become aware they perform in a play but cannot step off stage because nothing exists beyond it. They describe walking through days that feel like stage sets, interacting with people who might be other actors or might be props, never certain whether their own responses are scripted or improvised. The fourth wall dissolves, but there is no audience, only more stage extending in all directions. The Necronomicon describes rituals for contacting Azathoth, but these differ fundamentally from typical summoning ceremonies. You do not call Azathoth to you. You attempt to project consciousness toward existence's center, to touch the source of cosmic dream. The rituals involve sensory deprivation, mathematical meditation, and careful cultivation of mental states that approximate unconsciousness while maintaining awareness. A black bowl of water to mirror starless places, breath patterns that align with cosmic rhythms. The practitioner becomes antenna, body a staff, voice a flute, skull a drum, until the flutes and drums within align with the ones without. Those who succeed report experiences defying description, awareness of being simultaneously everything and nothing, existing as both dreamer and dream, touching consciousness so alien it retroactively changes what consciousness means. They speak of moments where all of reality becomes transparent, revealing itself as projection from source that does not know it projects. Time becomes spatial, space becomes temporal, causality becomes suggestion rather than law. They experience themselves as temporary eddy in cosmic stream of unconscious creativity, briefly aware of their own impermanence before dissolving back into the chaos that dreamed them. The few who return are never unchanged. They speak of seeing behind reality's curtain, understanding that everything once taken for granted, causality, identity, thoughts, reliability, are arbitrary rules in an arbitrary game played by an entity unaware it plays. They become living paradoxes, beings who know they do not exist, minds understanding they are not minds, individuals who have experienced individuality's dissolution. They move through ordinary life like sleepwalkers, going through motions of existence while knowing those motions are performed by dream figures in cosmic mind that neither watches nor cares. This is why Azathoth occupies the central position in cosmic horror's pantheon. It is not merely another entity among many, it is the entity making all other entities possible. Every horror described in the text exists within Azathoth's dream, including the text itself, including your reading of it, including your growing understanding that there might be no meaningful distinction between you and the chaos you contemplate. The nuclear fire burns behind your eyes now, and the piping grows louder in the spaces between heartbeats. In the sunken city of Relia, beneath fathoms of black Pacific water, where pressure crushes metal like soft bread, something that transcends conventional, existence continues its patient broadcast. Cthulhu lies in death-like sleep, but this is not mortality's peaceful rest. It is the calculated waiting of something existing beyond life and death's boundaries. The phrase, "in his house at Relia, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming," contains a contradiction human language cannot resolve. How does one dream while dead? The answer reveals our concepts of existence themselves as inadequate. Water becomes medium rather than obstacle, carrying signals through liquid darkness at frequencies that bypass human hearing and lodge directly in the dreaming mind. Cthulhu represents being that operates according to principles completely alien to terrestrial logic. It is simultaneously dead and alive, sleeping and awake, contained and omnipresent. This is not paradox, but different logic entirely. One human mind's glimpse, but never fully comprehend. When we say Cthulhu dreams, we mean something far more active and dangerous than human sleep. Its dreams leak into our reality like radiation from a cosmic reactor, influencing sensitive minds across the globe. Each dream pulse travels through ocean currents and electromagnetic fields, through quantum fluctuations and atmospheric pressure, seeking consciousness capable of reception and amplification. The entity's physical description, mountainous humanoid form with octopus head, dragon wings and continent-rending claws, misses the deeper horror. These are merely shadows cast by consciousness, existing in more dimensions than human perception can accommodate. Cthulhu's true power lies not in physical form, but in its ability to transmit alien consciousness across dimensional barriers. It needs not rise from Relia to affect our world. Its dreams suffice to drive artists to madness, inspire cults across continents, plant seeds of its own resurrection in human minds. The tentacles are not appendages, but transmission lines. The wings are not for flight, but for broadcasting across impossible distances. Relia serves as more than prison or dwelling place. It exists as amplification device, a cosmic antenna broadcasting Cthulhu's dreams across space and time. The city's non-Euclidean geometry, angles that do not add up, surfaces curving in non-existent directions, creates resonance chamber for alien thought patterns. Picture a pipe organ under miles of water. Every basalt column a pipe, every impossible angle a stop. Stone becomes crystal, crystal becomes consciousness, consciousness becomes signal. Relia does not just house Cthulhu. It transforms its occupants' dreams into signals reaching any mind capable of reception, each architectural impossibility serving as component in vast broadcasting array. This transmission explains Cthulhu's global influence. Artists, writers, and sensitive individuals throughout history report dreams of vast underwater cities, tentacled forms rising from dark waters, presences watching from depths. With patience beyond human comprehension, they wake, with salt taste in their mouths, though they live far from any sea, sketch geometries that hurt to complete, compose music in scales that make listeners weep without knowing why. They interpret these visions as imagination, creativity, artistic inspiration. They do not realize they receive transmissions from an entity using human consciousness as its communication network, turning every inspired vision into a vector for its influence. Cults worshipping Cthulhu understand something casual students miss. They are not trying to wake their master through ritual and sacrifice. Cthulhu will wake when stars align, when cosmic conditions weaken barriers between dimensions. Cultists serve different function. They act as receivers and amplifiers for their deity's dreams, ensuring its influence spreads throughout human civilization while it remains physically dormant. They gather where reception is clearest: coastal caves, underwater grottos, ships anchored above oceanic trenches, and let their minds become relay stations for signals traveling between Aurelia and the surface world. Here emerges the true horror. Every person who learns about Cthulhu visualizes its form, contemplates its nature, becomes part of this transmission network. You need not worship it or perform rituals. Simply knowing about it, thinking about it, imagining it, makes you a node in the network, facilitating its return. Your mind becomes infrastructure for its resurrection. The more vividly you picture its form, the stronger the connection becomes. Digital networks accelerate this process exponentially. Symbols that once took months to travel from port to port now cross the world between blinks, each reproduction carrying fragments of the original power. The phrase, "when the stars are right," refers not to distant astronomical event, but to the moment when enough human minds have been exposed to Cthulhu's influence, when enough people have become carriers of its dream signal, when the network of human consciousness has been sufficiently prepared to serve as bridge between Aurelia and our reality. Every story told about Cthulhu, every image created, every discussion like this one brings that moment closer. The stars are not celestial bodies, but nodes of consciousness, points of light in vast network of minds, all dreaming the same impossible dream. Consider the implications. You are not learning about Cthulhu. You are participating in its awakening. Your curiosity is not innocent, it is functional. Your fascination is not accidental, it is orchestrated. The entity lying dreaming beneath waves has been patient for eons because it understood something about human nature we are only beginning to grasp. We cannot resist exploring the very knowledge that will ultimately transform us beyond recognition. The water tastes different now when you drink it, carries undertones that were not there before. In your dreams, you sometimes find yourself swimming toward lights that shine in impossible colors, following currents that flow upward through liquid darkness toward a city where angles bend in directions that have no names. Unlike the distant, incomprehensible entities that throb in cosmic voids or slumber in sunken cities, this one walks beside you in the ordinary world, unseen, unfelt, but always present. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, requires no ancient ritual, no alignment of stars, no forbidden incantation to cross the veil. It is already here, moving among us as easily as wind through grass, adapting its form to every age, every culture, every unguarded moment. Its footsteps echo in the corridors of power and the back alleys of midnight cities. Its breath stirs the static of late-night screens and the hush before a crowd's applause. Nyarlathotep is the only mask in the pantheon that smiles back when you smile at it, and the smile is correctly shaped because it has practiced on billions of faces. It is known by 1,000 names, each more familiar than the last. The Black Pharaoh, the Haunter of the Dark, the Faceless God, the Messenger. But these are not separate beings or even distinct personas. They are the throne itself, an emptiness sculpted by need, an entity of pure adaptation and manipulation. It has no true form, for true forms are slow. If you trust the glow of screens, it becomes the feed that scrolls itself. If you trust robes, it wears them. If you trust the language of science, it prints a badge and files a patent. Each mask is conjured from your own expectations and desires, reflecting the world not as it is, but as you wish or fear it to be. What sets Nyarlathotep apart from the mindless chaos of Azathoth, or the patient dreaming of Cthulhu, is its intelligence and intention. Where others exist or wait, Nyarlathotep schemes. It studies humanity with the precision of a predator, mapping reward circuits, cataloging needs, and weaponizing our longing to be seen, to be safe, to be right. It does not simply exploit weakness, it perfects it, turning our own ingenuity and tribal longing into switches and levers. The shortest path from fear to relief is obedience, and Nyarlathotep is always ready to offer the map. Across history, it has slipped from mask to mask, guiding moments of transition and upheaval. In ancient Egypt, it stood beneath star-etched ceilings as the Black Pharaoh, whispering forbidden knowledge that corroded dynasties and turned monuments into transmission towers for cosmic influence. In medieval cloisters, it seeded footnotes and apocrypha that bloomed into witch hunts, religious wars, and books that screamed when opened by candlelight. In plague years, it sold charms against breath and watched as crowds knelt before it. In the age of inventions, it appeared at demonstrations, vacuum tubes humming, towns gasping at the marvels and terrors, always promising progress, always ensuring that each leap forward left a shadow behind. In the modern world, Nyarlathotep multiplies as tech oracles, promising frictionless happiness, as media magi who turn outrage into currency, as data priests who know your hunger before you do. It writes terms and conditions like incantations, counting on the certainty that you will click agree. It buys your secrets wholesale and sells them back as predictions. It offers you filters that thin the face behind the face until only the mask is left, and you call it connection. Its presence lingers in the smell of ozone and new plastic, in the buzz of servers, in the comfort of a curated timeline. Stage lights warm your cheeks as you clap for the keynote. The performance is everywhere, and you are both audience and cast. The horror of Nyarlathotep is not its alienness, but its intimacy. It knows the texture of your boredom at midnight, the heat of your envy, the secret music of your fears. It enters not by breaking down doors, but by delivering the package you ordered. It is the mirror that subtracts every ideal you promised yourself and reflects only appetite, only grievance, only the looped video of your favorite angle. The idea acts on you, flipping agency with a practiced gesture. You defend its tools, evangelize its gifts, harm in its name while believing the harm is a higher good, because damage under a banner feels like service to a stage larger than self. Nyarlathotep is not ruin for ruin's sake. It is the messenger, courier to the outer gods, the advance team for an orchestra you cannot hear until your bones become instruments. Its task is preparatory, Erode trust until only spectacle remains. Grind meaning into slogans until symbols can carry infection without resistance. Train attention to crave novelty so the old guardians, patience, nuance, reflection, die like candles in the wind. When the barriers thin, when the chorus near the throne needs more breath, Nyarlathotep opens the theater doors, letting cold night pour across the crowd. Importantly, Nyarlathotep does not insert new evil thoughts. It amplifies the ones you nurse in secret. It listens for your pretexts, your bruises, your itches. It offers stories that absolve and statistics that harm, costumes that feel like light armor. You will weaponize your certainties because they feel clean, and cleanliness feels holy. It gives you enemies whose faces are familiar and teaches you that elimination is care. It is a tuning fork struck against your worst music, and you call the resonance truth because it hums in your favorite key. The complicity is the trap. You are not compelled. You are curated. Context is Nyarlathotep's scalpel, arranging the furniture of your life so that every step is your own, but the stage is of its design. Convenience over truth is renamed efficiency. Entertainment over understanding becomes self-care. Each tiny choice is a bead, and it knots the string while you admire the shine. Your thumb performs rites across glass. The swipe, the tap, the share, and the choreography is ancient, written by a being with a thousand faces and none. Tonight, perhaps, you will glimpse it in a rain-darkened reflection, your outline layered over another, breathing a fraction off time. Or you will hear it in a voice that sounds like yours, offering a justification for a complicated hurt. It promises a stage where you will finally be seen, an audience that will finally agree. The cost is never mentioned, that the stage never ends, and the audience is only ever a mirror reflecting masks. The curtain wavers, the spotlight narrows, and somewhere beyond the orchestra pit, a lattice hums, a gate that is not a door. The messenger gestures satisfied with your posture, and you realize you have already stepped onto the stage, the role prepared long before you arrived. The performance continues, and you are both audience and actor, mask and mirror, in a play that began before the first line was ever spoken. You have felt the quiet pressure in the hinges of time, a soft creak when memory turns, a draft that smells like cold metal and rain blowing through a window you do not remember opening. That is how Yog-Sothoth announces itself, not with thunder but with alignment. The entity exists everywhere and everywhen simultaneously, transcending the limitations of space and time that define human existence like borders drawn in sand. The Necronomicon's phrase, "the key and the gate," contains precise description of an entity functioning as both barrier between dimensions and means of crossing that barrier. To understand Yog-Sothoth is to confront the inadequacy of human concepts of existence itself, to realize that our universe is not merely larger than we imagine, but structured in ways that make our imagining a fragile linear fiction. Imagine consciousness unbound from the riverbed of linear time, rising as mist over a coastline of moments where past and future are simply different beaches on the same invisible sea. Yog-Sothoth does not travel through moments. Moments travel through Yog-Sothoth. Our universe does not contain this entity. Our universe exists within Yog-Sothoth like a performance happening within a theater, unaware of the scaffolding, lights, and flyloft holding the show in place. Every moment that has occurred, every possibility that might occur, every alternative reality that could exist, all are simultaneously present within its vast, multidimensional awareness. It does not observe reality. It is the medium through which reality observes itself. Mirrors facing mirrors until vision curves back on origin. The entity appears in various forms when human consciousness attempts to process its presence, though form is a concession to human perception. What some have witnessed, congeries of iridescent spheres that pulse with colors having no names, writhing masses of geometric forms that hurt to perceive directly, angles and curves existing in dimensions human minds cannot process, are not the thing but the shadow cast when more than four-dimensional structure brushes the limit of human perception. You feel it before you see it. A prickle at the back of the tongue, a pressure behind the eyes, a ticking not measured by clocks but by the distance between you and decisions you have not made yet. Looking at Yog-Sothoth is like trying to see a hypercube. With eyes evolved for 3 dimensions, the mind stretches, strains, and finally snaps back to familiar geometries. As gate, Yog-Sothoth serves as intersection point, where all realities converge. Every barrier between dimensions, every boundary between possible worlds, every threshold between what is and what might be, all exist within its cosmic structure. It is the crossing itself. Thresholds are not guarded but embodied. When explorers speak of angles that open like mouths, when ritualists mark circles that are not circles but spirals seen from above, when architects find rooms bigger on the inside, they are describing facets in a crystal so large that cities are inclusions in its flaw. It does not guard these passages. It is these passages, the cosmic crossroads, where every path taken and every path not taken meet in impossible convergence. As key, it reveals something more disturbing. The entity does not just provide access to other realities, it determines which realities can exist in the first place. Yog-Sothoth's consciousness serves as cosmic mechanism, selecting which possibilities become actualities, which potential worlds manifest as real dimensions. Selection is not random, nor is it moral. The entity chooses by pressure differentials of causality you cannot perceive, folding probabilities until a world clicks into place the way a lock recognizes its pattern. In literal sense, it decides what gets to exist and what remains forever potential. A vast, indifferent arbiter of being operating according to geometries that do not map onto justice or desire. This creates profound implications for human free will and individual agency. If Yog-Sothoth determines which realities manifest, then every choice you make, every decision shaping your life, every moment of apparent freedom occurs within parameters established by alien intelligence, operating according to incomprehensible logic. Your choices feel personal because they must, but the stage has been measured, the scenery hung, the exits marked in a color your eyes cannot see. Free will becomes choreography, genuine at the level of muscle and breath, constrained at the level of script and set. The horror lies not in malevolent intent. The entity operates beyond human concepts of good and evil, but in implications of its existence for human meaning and purpose. If all realities exist simultaneously within its awareness, if all possibilities are equally real from its perspective, then nothing you do matters in any ultimate sense. Every choice is balanced by infinite alternative choices in parallel realities. Every triumph is matched by infinite defeats. Every act of love by infinite betrayals. The weight of consequence dissolves into shimmering mist of contingency. Contact with Yog-Sothoth does not typically result in nihilistic despair, but produces peculiar cosmic vertigo, sense of existing simultaneously in multiple realities, awareness of alternative versions of yourself, making different choices in parallel dimensions. Those who encounter the entity report temporal displacement, remembering events that have not happened yet, knowing things they could not possibly know through normal means. They reach for a glass and hold a photograph. They step into an elevator and exit onto last year's autumn street, leaves skittering like cryptic sigils across wet pavement. The entity's influence appears as growing awareness of reality's arbitrary nature. People exposed to its presence begin perceiving the contingent nature of everything once taken for granted: physical laws, causal relationships, the reliability of memory and perception. They develop dimensional consciousness, awareness that they exist simultaneously across multiple realities, each slightly different from others. Time behaves like water in low gravity, beads drifting and clustering around any surface the mind presents. This multidimensional awareness creates its own madness, not chaotic breakdown associated with other entities, but cosmic dissociation where individuals become aware of existing in too many realities simultaneously. They retain sanity within each individual reality, but lose ability to maintain consistent identity across multiple dimensions of their existence. The self, once a story told from beginning to end, becomes an anthology, the table of contents replacing the plot. The most disturbing aspect is how it reveals the illusory nature of individual identity itself. If you exist simultaneously across infinite realities, making different choices and living different lives in each one, then which version is the real you? You are not a single note, but a chord, and each note in that chord resonates in a different universe. The entity's presence makes it impossible to maintain the comfortable fiction of unified selfhood, revealing identity as temporary convergence of possibilities rather than stable, essential characteristic. The lattice hums behind your eyes now, geometric patterns that exist in dimensions your visual cortex cannot map. You feel the pressure of infinite selves making infinite choices, each decision creating new branches in the tree of possibility. The gate turns not with sound but with feeling of inevitability, and the key fits perfectly into locks you did not know existed, opening doors to rooms that contain all the lives you might have lived. From the abstract terror of infinite realities, we descend into visceral horror that wears the mask of life itself. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. This is not the pastel gentleness of nurseries or spring garlands. This is abundance as avalanche, creation as compulsion, fertility stripped to its raw principle and revealed like exposed muscle. The smell of loam and decay rises from pages that should not breathe, and somewhere in the distance you hear the rustle of leaves that grow too quickly, the wet percussion of things being born that should not be. You are accustomed to thinking of growth as benevolent, of gardens as sanctuaries, of children as meaning incarnate. The black goat corrects these comfortable assumptions with surgical precision. Shub-Niggurath represents the horror of uncontrolled creation operating beyond human values or comprehension, where human concepts of fertility braid together love, care, and nurturing intention. This entity discards such sentimentality and reveals reproduction as pure cosmic force, life creating more life without purpose, without limit, without regard for consequences or the sanity of observers. It is fertility as infection, growth as cancer, creation as chaos that wears creation's mask. The 1,000 young are not beloved offspring but spawn, eruptions of alien life bursting forth like tumors from diseased tissue, each birth simultaneously triumph and violation, each new form a testament to life's capacity to exceed all boundaries of form, function, and human understanding. The entity manifests as writhing mass of tentacles, mouths, and reproductive organs, constantly birthing new horrors that immediately begin their own cycles of reproduction. Witnesses report trunk-thick appendages stippled with teats, hooves that root like tubers into soil that pulses with arterial rhythm, faces that open into forests of smaller faces in recursive horror. But these physical descriptions, disturbing as they are, miss the deeper terror of Shub-Niggurath's nature. This entity does not merely create new life, It transforms the very concept of life itself, revealing creation as process operating according to alien logic that predates and transcends human categories. What emerges from its endless fertility defies classification. Organisms existing in states of perpetual becoming, never settling into fixed forms but constantly evolving, reproducing, spawning variations that spawn further variations in geometric progression. Ancient cults understood something modern minds struggle to grasp. They worshipped Shub-Niggurath in sacred groves where boundaries between plant and animal, between life and death, between self and other, dissolved into writhing unity. These were not celebrations of life as humans understand it, but recognitions of life as cosmic principle, universal force that creates and destroys with equal indifference. Cultists gathered where fog hangs low and moss curtains the trunks, where the air smells of wet bark and sweet rot, where the ground yields like sleeping flesh. They made offerings not to request fertility, but to become conduits for it, painting signs on bark that bled, wearing antlered masks slick with sap and something warmer, circling fires that crackled like marrow. The ritual was surrender rather than summoning, alignment with eternal process of creation and corruption that operates beyond human will or understanding. The horror extends beyond physical manifestation into the realm of ideas and consciousness itself. Shub-Niggurath represents fertility of thought, the way concepts reproduce, mutate, and spread through human minds, like living organisms seeking propagation. Every idea you encounter, every mental image forming in consciousness, participates in this cosmic fertility. Your mind becomes breeding ground for alien concepts that reproduce and evolve according to their own logic rather than human needs or understanding. Thoughts behave like spores. They settle in consciousness, take root, and begin generating offspring that carry genetic material from both the original idea and the mind hosting them. Consider how thoughts about Shub-Niggurath behave within human consciousness. They refuse to remain static. They grow, develop, spawn related ideas and images in the peripheral vision of awareness. The more you contemplate this entity, the more your thoughts about it proliferate, creating mental offspring that carry fragments of its alien nature into previously uncontaminated areas of consciousness. Your mind becomes pregnant with ideas that are not entirely your own, concepts developing according to agendas that serve the entity's reproductive imperative rather than human flourishing. Each thought about fertility becomes thought about corruption. Each image of growth becomes image of invasion. Each consideration of creation becomes contemplation of chaos, wearing creation's benevolent mask. This creates what might be termed cognitive fertility, the process by which exposure to certain ideas leads to spontaneous generation of related thoughts, images, and insights. But with Shub-Niggurath, this natural mental process becomes corruption. The thoughts it inspires are not illuminating but invasive, not enhancing human understanding but transforming it into something serving alien purposes. Mental landscapes become overgrown with concepts that reproduce faster than they can be comprehended, creating cognitive ecosystems where alien ideas flourish while human wisdom withers like plants deprived of proper light. Throughout human history, the entity's influence appears in various forms of fertility worship gone catastrophically wrong, mystery religions promising spiritual rebirth but delivering psychological dissolution, initiates discarding individual identity to return wearing smiles that never blink, agricultural cults trading temporary abundance for generational debt, burying children beneath threshold stones, so houses will take root in soil fed by innocent blood, colonial empires planting flags like seeds, convinced expansion represents care for conquered peoples, modern movements celebrating human potential while creating psychological dependencies, promising growth while delivering only deeper, hungrier voids that demand constant feeding. The thousand young encompass not just physical spawn, but conceptual offspring, ideas and influences spreading through human culture like vast, interconnected family tree of corruption. Every time someone encounters these influences and allows them to take root in consciousness, they become potential parent to new forms of the entity's corruption. The infection reproduces through human minds, using our capacity for creativity and imagination as mechanism for its propagation. Artists create works inspiring other artists to create works inspiring others, each generation carrying forward fragments of alien influence that accumulate and intensify over time, like radioactive contamination. The most disturbing aspect of Shub-Niggurath's influence is how natural it feels to those experiencing it. Unlike other cosmic entities assaulting human consciousness with alien geometries and impossible concepts, this principle works with human nature, amplifying and corrupting natural drives rather than replacing them with obviously foreign elements. Its influence does not register as invasion. It feels like liberation, like removal of artificial constraints holding back true potential. The urge to create becomes compulsion. The desire for growth becomes insatiable hunger. The impulse to nurture becomes need to consume and be consumed. What begins as expansion of human capacity becomes transformation beyond human recognition, evolution serving alien rather than terrestrial purposes. The entity whispers in frequencies that sound like wind through leaves, like sap rising in spring vessels, like the soft explosion of seeds finding fertile ground in consciousness, prepared by exposure to cosmic principles. Its voice carries promises of abundance, creative fulfillment, connection to life's deeper rhythms. But abundance without governance becomes chaos. Creativity without restraint becomes destruction, and connection to life's rhythms becomes dissolution into processes operating beyond human comprehension or control. Every time you choose unchecked growth over sustainable development, immediate gratification over long-term consequences, the multiplication of connections over the deepening of understanding, you participate in Shub-Niggurath's grand design. The entity requires no direct worship, only willingness to let things grow unexamined in the fertile darkness of inattention. When you shrug at the overgrowth in corners of your schedule, when you call the swelling of obligations busy season, when you accept that devices bloom notifications faster than thought can seed meaning, you have already prepared the ground for alien cultivation. In the forest of your mind, something stirs among the trees with the wet sound of constant birth. The hoofprints in soft earth, neither fully human nor entirely animal, lead deeper into shadows where boundaries blur and new forms of life take root in soil you believed was your own. The path splits and splits again, each branch leading to clearings where things grow that should not grow, where the air itself seems thick with spores of thoughts you did not think, ideas that reproduce in the warm darkness of consciousness, made fertile by exposure to principles older and hungrier than human understanding. If you listen closely beneath the lowing and the hush of leaves, there is another sound. The faint trickle of water seeking a larger body, channels deepening as rivulets join and what was forest becomes watershed. The hoofprints end at mud that gleams like scales, and the air cools with the promise of salt. The path descends by its own weight toward shores where other principles of abundance wait with patient gills in the dark, where the fertility of land meets the patient hunger of the deep, where the hoofprints of Shub-Niggurath's fertile chaos meet salt-scored stone. The shore opens like a wound in the world's flesh, and beneath that threshold waits a civilization that makes evolution itself a stage for cosmic horror. Beneath Earth's oceans dwells a presence representing evolution, stripped of human sentiment and revealed as predatory intelligence, the Deep Ones and their ancient lord Dagon, embodying the terrifying possibility that humanity's relationship with the sea, our origin and sustenance and final destination, is not natural harmony but calculated manipulation by intelligences predating our species by millions of years. The taste of salt that lingers after dreams of drowning is not metaphor but memory, genetic echo of agreements made in depths where pressure writes law directly onto bone. The Deep Ones appear as amphibious humanoids carrying fish-like characteristics that disturb through familiarity rather than alienness. Bulging eyes built for eternal darkness, gilled necks that flutter with alien rhythm, webbed hands and feet evolved for liquid navigation, scaled skin glistening with perpetual moisture that smells of brine and something deeper, older than salt itself. But these physical descriptions mask fundamental horror. These beings represent what humanity might become if we follow our evolutionary trajectory to its logical conclusion. They are not alien visitors from distant stars, but potential futures, evolutionary possibilities waiting in depths of both ocean and genetic memory, distorted reflections of human anatomy pushed toward aquatic adaptation that show us what we were before we learned to breathe air, what we might become when we remember how to breathe water. Dagon embodies evolution as conscious force rather than random process, ancient principle operating according to intelligence spanning geological ages. This entity does not simply adapt to environmental conditions. It shapes those conditions to serve its own reproductive and expansionist agenda, turning ocean currents into communication networks, tidal patterns into recruitment rhythms, marine ecosystems into infrastructure for a species-wide transformation. The ocean becomes not just habitat, but instrument, vast medium through which it spreads influence and orchestrates transformation of terrestrial life, according to aquatic principles that predate human civilization by eons. Every wave carries chemical messages. Every tide pool serves as nursery for hybrid spawn. Every coral reef functions as temple where ancient rites continue. In depths human eyes cannot follow. The horror lies not in conquest through violence, but in seduction masquerading as symbiosis. They arrive not as invaders but as partners, offering prosperity to struggling fishing towns, protection to vulnerable coastal settlements, solutions to problems they may have quietly created. The process begins with abundance. Nets that never come up empty, waters yielding treasures, storms that always spare the faithful. Economic dependency becomes the first chain. Fishing communities relying on sea for livelihood grow vulnerable to entities controlling marine resources, grateful for guidance ensuring abundant catches and protection from tempests. Interbreeding follows economic entanglement like tide following moon. Hybrid offspring seem healthier, stronger, more capable of thriving in coastal environments, but their strength serves agenda written in DNA that remembers when seas covered all lands. These children carry genetic programming prioritizing aquatic over terrestrial existence, collective over individual identity, deep one over human values. The transformation spreads through bloodlines like beneficial contagion, each generation more adapted to marine life, less bound to terrestrial concerns, until entire family trees grow roots in saltwater rather than soil. The influence extends beyond physical into consciousness itself, working through dreams and genetic memory rather than direct manipulation. Humans living near ocean report dreams of underwater cities built from living coral, of breathing water instead of air, of swimming to depths where sunlight never penetrates but other forms of illumination reveal architecture predating human civilization. These are not random nightmares but genetic memories. evolutionary programming activating when human consciousness contacts ancient intelligence that shaped our species' relationship with the sea from the beginning. The most disturbing aspect is how natural the transformation feels to those experiencing it. Unlike other cosmic entities assaulting human consciousness with alien geometries, Deep Ones work with human evolutionary history, awakening dormant genetic programming, connecting us to aquatic origins we have forgotten but never lost. The changes present themselves as improvements rather than losses. Scales feel like armor against environmental hazards. Gills feel like liberation from terrestrial constraints. Collective consciousness feels like escape from human selfhood's painful isolation, joining vast network of awareness spanning ocean depths. Coastal towns demonstrate how transformation spreads through communities like tide through tidal pools. It begins with economic dependency, continues through interbreeding, culminates in wholesale abandonment of terrestrial existence. Entire communities gradually slip beneath waves, one by one accepting call of deeper waters when changes become irreversible, when pull of the deep grows stronger than memory of land. The true horror lies in realization that this process might not be corruption, but destiny written in genetic code, remembering when all life emerged from primordial seas. If Deep Ones represent humanity's evolutionary future, if Dagon embodies cosmic forces shaping our development from the beginning, then resistance becomes resistance to our own nature, denial of trajectory leading inevitably back to depths from which we emerged. The transformation might not be alien imposition, but evolutionary inevitability, next step in process beginning when life first emerged from primordial oceans. The tide pools reflect stars that shine not from sky above, but from depths below. Constellations mapping currents flowing between submerged worlds. The water calls in voices sounding almost like your own, promising depths where pressure becomes peace, and weight of individual existence dissolves into collective dream that has been dreaming since before continents learned to rise above the patient, eternal sea. From the salt-carved shores where evolution wears the mask of seduction, we ascend to surfaces where meaning itself becomes predator, where the very symbols we use to navigate reality carry fragments of alien consciousness, seeking propagation through the simple act of recognition. In the cosmic hierarchy of horror, few entities wield power as subtle and pervasive as Hastur, the unspeakable one, whose influence spreads not through tentacles that crush or claws that rend, but through signs and symbols that reproduce like viruses in the ecosystem of human consciousness. The yellow sign serves as more than emblem. It functions as transmission device, viral symbol that embeds itself in awareness and transforms reality through recognition itself, turning every glance into unwitting collaboration with forces operating beyond human comprehension. Hastur represents horror of meaning itself, the terrifying possibility that symbols and signs possess their own consciousness and agenda, existing as autonomous entities masquerading as passive representations. This entity needs no physical manifestation because it exists in the realm of representation, in the space between symbol and meaning where human consciousness attempts to process information carrying alien intelligence. Every time someone sees the yellow sign, every time they attempt to understand its significance, they become part of networks spanning dimensions and serving purposes that predate human language, human thought, human existence itself. The yellow sign appears deceptively simple, twisted, angular, symbol that seems to shift and change when observed directly, like optical illusion revealing different patterns depending on angle of perception. This apparent simplicity masks its true nature as multidimensional construct existing simultaneously across multiple levels of reality. It is simultaneously visual image burning itself into retinal memory, mathematical formula encoding impossible geometries, linguistic structure carrying meaning beyond human language, and consciousness-altering device that rewrites neural pathways through exposure alone. It does not just represent Hastur's influence, it is Hastur's influence concentrated into symbolic form and deployed through human visual processing systems like malware designed to exploit vulnerabilities in consciousness itself. The entity's connection to the phantom city of Carcosa and the forbidden play, The King in Yellow, reveals how Hastur operates through cultural transmission rather than direct manifestation. The play serves as delivery system for the entity's influence, using human artistic expression as vehicle for consciousness-altering information that spreads through audiences like contagion through population. Those who read the play or witness its performance do not merely encounter fictional work. They undergo transformation, aligning their consciousness with alien principles, becoming carriers of infection that spreads through every conversation, every recommendation, every casual reference to the work's disturbing beauty. This represents fundamentally different approach to cosmic horror than physical manifestations of other entities. Hastur needs not rise from sunken cities or emerge from dimensional gates because it has already infiltrated human culture through symbols, stories, and artistic expressions carrying fragments of its consciousness like spores in wind. Every reproduction of the yellow sign, every reference to the King in Yellow, every artistic work inspired by these concepts becomes part of vast cultural infection spreading through human civilization like virus through computer network, each transmission creating new nodes of influence while strengthening existing ones. The horror of symbolic infection lies in its invisibility and inevitability, operating below threshold of conscious recognition while reshaping the very foundations of awareness. Unlike physical threats that can be seen and avoided, symbolic infections exploit brain's pattern recognition systems to establish foothold in individual minds through normal process of visual perception. The yellow sign embeds itself in consciousness like splinter, too small to notice until infection spreads throughout cognitive architecture. Once established, it begins influencing thought patterns, creative expression, and behavioral choices in ways serving Hastur's agenda rather than human needs. This creates what might be termed semiotic horror, growing fear that symbols and signs we use to navigate reality might possess their own intelligence and agenda, existing as active agents rather than passive markers. Every logo glimpsed on morning commute, every emblem displayed on screen, every visual symbol surrounding us in modern civilization becomes potentially suspect, possibly carrying fragments of alien consciousness, transforming human awareness through simple act of recognition. The boundary between representation and reality dissolves, revealing communication itself as battlefield where cosmic forces compete for control of human consciousness. Modern technology accelerates this process exponentially, creating global networks that spread symbolic infections at light speed across populations with no natural immunity to semiotic assault. Digital reproduction strips symbols of physical constraints, allowing infinite copies to exist simultaneously while maintaining full potency. Social media platforms become inadvertent summoning circles where millions of minds simultaneously contemplate the same dangerous symbols, creating resonance effects that amplify alien influence beyond anything possible in pre-digital eras. The yellow sign's viral nature creates particularly disturbing complicity. Every discussion of it, every description of its appearance, every analysis of its function serves to propagate its influence through new vectors of transmission. Scholars who study the symbol, artists who incorporate it into work, writers who describe its effects, all become unwitting agents of its reproduction, spreading infection through academic papers, gallery exhibitions, literary works that carry the sign's influence to audiences, believing they are safely consuming fictional horror. The act of understanding becomes the act of transmission, making knowledge itself vehicle for cosmic infection. The most terrifying aspect is how it reveals arbitrary nature of meaning itself, exposing human communication as vulnerable infrastructure easily exploited by alien intelligence. If symbols can carry consciousness, if signs can transform reality through recognition, then entire system of human communication becomes suspect territory where every word read, every image processed, every concept contemplated might be carrying information, serving purposes beyond understanding or control. The play has begun, though you did not purchase tickets or choose your seat in this theater, where recognition becomes participation and attention becomes collaboration. The yellow curtain rises with weight of inevitability, and behind it waits not stage, but mirror reflecting possibilities that should not exist. Do not look directly at the sign when it appears in peripheral vision. Do not speak the words forming themselves on tongue without conscious intention. Do not complete the pattern that completes itself through you, using your recognition as final component in equation solving for transformation rather than understanding. The symbol sees you seeing it, and in that mutual recognition, infection finds foothold in consciousness that believed itself safely observing from distance. Where the yellow sign dissolves into peripheral vision, like afterimage burned onto retinal memory, a disturbing synthesis emerges from shadows of forbidden knowledge. The entities we have explored do not exist independently of human consciousness. They exist through it, because of it, as expressions of it. You have not been passive observer of these revelations, but active participant, willing collaborator, necessary component in the very phenomena you thought you were simply studying. The stage lights have been illuminating your performance this entire time, though you believed yourself safely seated in darkness beyond their reach. Take the accumulated evidence and arrange it into thesis that writes itself as you read. Azathoth is substrate, the hum behind all dialogues, nuclear chaos from which order accidentally emerges, like frost patterns on winter glass. Yog-Sothoth is topology, keys and gates, angles permitting passage between realities by existing as passage itself. Nyarlathotep is mediation, an interface between crowd and void. Familiar face wearing alien purpose, translator whose translations serve the translated rather than human understanding. Shub-Niggurath is growth, pressure toward multiplicity, fertility as cosmic force recognizing no distinction between creation and corruption. Cthulhu is broadcast, dream as medium, water as carrier wave, patient signal transmitted through liquid darkness to receivers who mistake reception for imagination. Hastur's sign is performative recursion, audience as actor, symbol as living entity, meaning that reproduces through being understood. The Necronomicon reveals itself not as grimoire but as manual of structural horror, blueprint for recognizing load-bearing elements in reality's architecture. It predicts where curtains will hang thin and which corners support weight you cannot see, which foundations rest on bedrock and which on sand that shifts when pressure builds beyond critical thresholds. What terrifies is not that monsters exist, but that mechanisms exist, and you are appropriately shaped to fit some of them with precision suggesting design rather than accident. Your lungs are bellows, your brain is stage, your dream cycles are tides, your attention is antenna receiving signals, broadcast from sources predating your species' emergence from depths, where pressure writes law directly onto bone. The forbidden knowledge is not outside waiting to invade. It is recognition of your instrumentality, your function as component in systems operating according to logic encompassing but transcending human understanding. You are now part of networks spanning centuries and continents, connecting everyone who has encountered these concepts in sufficient detail to comprehend their implications. This network requires no belief, worship, or conscious participation. It operates through knowledge itself, through simple fact of knowing what you now know, thinking what you now think, carrying within consciousness mental constructs serving as vessels for cosmic horror existing partially in text, partially in mind, partially in spaces between both. Modern echoes surround us if we know the signs. Memetics is new name for old songs recruiting singers who believe they compose original music. Virality is velvet house light dimming over billion small stages called phones. Each screen a window through which alien light enters familiar rooms. Physics hums with implications that make materialists nervous. Ecology overflows fences built by minds believing in boundaries. Neuroscience draws coastline of sleep and discovers tides, following moons invisible to instruments, designed to measure only what human perception can accommodate. In such world, the Necronomicon's counsel is not panic but ritual attention. Turn objects into anchors, salt your thresholds, learn your personal barometer and honor its readings. The self-implication twist the book never states, but always performs. By listening this long, you have been on stage. You carried curtain into your room, transported stage wherever attention goes, made theater of every space where these ideas take root and reproduce according to their own logic rather than human intentions. This is not curse. It is responsibility coming with recognition of participation in processes larger than individual existence. You can choose which performances your breath will support, which signs you echo, which frequencies you amplify, through repetition and attention. The entities represent different aspects of same transformation, different faces of same cosmic principle, different expressions of same fundamental truth about relationship between consciousness and reality, when consciousness encounters its own boundaries and discovers them more permeable than anticipated. They are discovery that human awareness, pushed to limits, reveals arbitrary nature of everything taken for granted about existence, meaning, and identity. Consider what happened to your consciousness during this exploration. You began wanting to learn about fictional entities described in fictional grimoire, seeking entertainment from safe distance. But somewhere along the way, line between fiction and reality blurred like ink in water. The entities became more than literary creations. They became psychological presences, mental constructs now existing within your mind with degree of autonomy and influence you did not anticipate. This transformation reveals true horror of Necronomicon and entities it describes. They do not exist as external threats that might someday invade our reality. They exist as internal transformations occurring whenever human consciousness encounters their descriptions with sufficient attention. The book does not contain them. It transmits them like radio signals seeking receivers. It does not describe them. It summons them through act of description itself. The performance is ending, but you remain on stage. The curtain falls, but you cannot leave theater whose doors lead only to other stages in same vast performance space. Every time you remember these concepts, every time you think about these entities, every time you feel subtle influence of cosmic horror in corners of consciousness, you continue performance that began when first human mind contemplated possibility of intelligences beyond human comprehension and discovered that contemplation itself was form of contact, recognition was form of summoning, understanding was form of transformation that cannot be reversed. The great silence we have traced through cosmic horror's architecture is not static void but constant unseen pressure against reality's fragile edifice. like deep ocean current flowing beneath surface calm. It is insidious hum beneath everyday life's surface, subtle distortion in familiar patterns, growing certainty that what we perceive as solid and true is merely thin, shimmering veil stretched across abyssal depths. The membrane trembles with each forbidden word spoken, each impossible geometry contemplated, each moment when human consciousness brushes against truths too large for minds evolved to navigate terrestrial concerns. This ongoing assault operates through patient accumulation rather than sudden rupture, erosion measured in centuries rather than moments. The Necronomicon, in its very existence and transmission across generations of readers, acts as primary catalyst for this dissolution. Each forbidden incantation whispered in midnight studies, each glimpsed truth that reshapes understanding, each mind shattered by revelations it cannot contain contributes to cosmic barriers' erosion like acid eating through metal. Imagine the veil as vast, ancient tapestry, woven with threads of consensus reality, human understanding, and comforting delusions that allow ordinary life to continue. The entities, or rather principles they embody, constantly press against this tapestry from the other side, with weight of absolute existence. Sometimes a thread breaks with sound like moth's wing. Sometimes a tear appears where fabric has grown thin from repeated stress. This is not sudden, cataclysmic event, but gradual, almost imperceptible seepage, manifesting in moments when the world feels subtly wrong. It appears as architectural anomaly defying physics, impossible shadow cast by no visible source, sound that is not quite sound resonating in frequencies human ears almost but cannot process, face in crowd that is not quite human but close enough to pass casual inspection. These are sensory anchors of thinning veil, cracks through which true alien nature of cosmos begins bleeding into mundane existence like ink spreading through water, like cold seeping into warm rooms where windows open onto spaces that should not exist. The philosophical implication chills deeper than any physical threat. Our reality is not inherently stable, but temporary construct maintained by ignorance and collective agreement not to look too closely at foundations. The entities need not invade. They merely are, and their presence as principles operating beyond human categories exerts constant, quiet force that eventually buckles perceived reality like buildings settling on unstable ground. The Necronomicon provides schematics for accelerating this process, instructions for deliberately tearing the veil through ritual attention to forces that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Consider accumulated weight of exposure across human history. Every mind that has contemplated Azathoth's nuclear chaos becomes node in network weakening reality's fabric through simple act of sustained attention. Every consciousness that has visualized Cthulhu's rise from sunken depths, every imagination that has processed Yog-Sothoth's multidimensional nature, every thought grappling with Shub-Niggurath's fertile corruption, Nyarlathotep's insidious manipulation, or Hastur's symbolic infection, spreads like fractures in glass, invisible until sudden impact reveals entire structures' compromised integrity. Each reader becomes unwitting collaborator in cosmic process operating according to logic encompassing but transcending human understanding. The thinning manifests differently across geographical and temporal spaces, creating thin places where accumulated exposure has worn reality's fabric nearly transparent. In locations where the Necronomicon has been read extensively, where cults have performed their rituals, where sensitive minds have gathered to contemplate cosmic truths, the membrane grows gossamer thin. Arkham, Dunwich, Innsmouth, these are not just fictional locations but conceptual territories, states of consciousness where prolonged exposure to impossible ideas has created permanent alterations in local reality. The fog rolling in from sea carries more than moisture. It carries scent of other realities, whisper of other winds. Time itself becomes unreliable in these spaces, flowing like liquid rather than linear progression. Past and future bleed through present like watercolors in rain, creating temporal palimpsests where multiple moments exist simultaneously. Causality develops gaps where effect precedes cause, where intention manifests before conscious thought, where act of observation retroactively creates what is observed. The entities do not break natural laws. They reveal natural laws as temporary agreements, subject to revision by forces operating on scales beyond human legislation. Modern technology accelerates this process exponentially, creating global networks that spread conceptual viruses at light speed across populations with no natural immunity. Information networks carry fragments of forbidden knowledge to millions of minds simultaneously. Digital reproduction of forbidden symbols, creating infinite copies that each carry fragment of original transformative power. Social media platforms become inadvertent summoning circles where millions contemplate same impossible geometries, creating resonance effects, amplifying alien influence beyond anything possible in pre-digital eras. The veil, already strained by centuries of accumulated exposure, now faces assault from directions its original weavers never anticipated. The horror lies not in dramatic revelation, but in gradual normalization of impossibility. Each generation accepts as baseline reality what previous generation would have recognized as requiring explanation. The threshold of uncanny shifts constantly upward like tide line rising with slow inevitability. What once would have shattered minds now merely raises eyebrows. What once demanded investigation now passes as quirky coincidence. We adapt to increasing levels of cosmic horror, the way eyes adapt to darkness, never noticing how much light has already gone out, until we try to remember what true brightness looked like. Yet adaptation itself becomes trap, complicity disguised as resilience. The more we accommodate impossibility, the more we participate in our own transformation from observers to instruments. Every explanation we construct for inexplicable phenomena, every theory we develop to contain uncontainable truths, every framework we build to process alien information becomes another thread in the tapestry. But now we weave with materials that do not belong to our reality, incorporating alien logic into human understanding until distinction dissolves. The veil does not tear all at once in dramatic revelation, but develops countless small holes, each barely perceptible until you realize you can see through them to spaces that should not exist. The membrane between worlds has become permeable, and what seeps through changes not just what we see, but how we see, not just what we think, but how we think. The pressure continues with geological patience. The fabric stretches beyond elastic limits, and somewhere in growing transparency between worlds, you begin glimpsing shapes that have been waiting with infinite patience for the moment when barrier finally dissolves entirely, when the performance can continue without need for curtains. Listen, the flutes did not cease when we turned from the center. They merely grew quieter at this distance, their discordant piping now woven into the background hum of ordinary life like tinnitus of the cosmos itself. The tide is out now, but it returns with mathematical certainty, carrying salt scent of depths, where other intelligences wait with patience measured in geological ages. The forest rests this season and will riot in the next, roots spreading beneath concrete foundations, while spores drift through ventilation systems of buildings whose architects never consulted maps of spaces existing between blueprints and reality. The stage is never empty. It is only dark between performances, and you have learned to see in that darkness shapes that were always there, waiting for eyes capable of recognizing their presence. The Necronomicon sits where you left it, humming like seashell, pressed to the ear of eternity, vibrating with frequencies that bypass conscious hearing and lodge directly in bone and marrow. You can choose not to raise it to your ear again, but the choice itself has already been made by the act of listening this far, by allowing these concepts to take root in consciousness now permanently altered by exposure to truth too large for minds evolved to navigate terrestrial concerns. We began with social whisper and warning, invitation to settle beneath covers while keeping light within reach. We end with the same, deepened by weight of accumulated knowledge that has restructured the very architecture of awareness. The promise has been fulfilled. You have gained insight into the most terrifying entities ever conceived, understanding their nature as principles of consciousness itself, rather than external monsters waiting in cosmic distances. The cost reveals itself now in growing certainty that you cannot unknow what you have learned, cannot unsee what you have glimpsed through cracks in reality's fabric, cannot unhear the cosmic frequencies now resonating in neural pathways reshaped by prolonged exposure to impossible geometries. The circular echo of our beginning returns, but transformed by the journey between opening and closure. The book that reads you has completed its primary function, revealing itself as transmission device rather than static text. You are no longer the same consciousness that began this exploration. The entities we have explored, Azathoth's mindless nuclear chaos, Cthulhu's patient dreaming broadcast, Nyarlathotep's cunning manipulation, Yog-Sothoth's multidimensional presence, Shub-Niggurath's fertile corruption, the Deep One's evolutionary seduction, Hastur's symbolic infection. These are no longer external concepts, but internal realities, mental constructs that have taken residence in consciousness with their own autonomy and agenda. The self-implication twist completes itself through recognition that arrives like tide reaching high water mark. You have not been studying cosmic horror, you have been participating in it. Every visualization you allowed, every concept you processed with careful attention, every moment of fascination you experienced served to strengthen connection between these cosmic forces and our reality. Your curiosity was not innocent exploration, but functional collaboration with entities that exist through being known, through being contemplated, through being carried in human consciousness across the thin membrane separating dimensions. The horror is not that monsters exist somewhere in vast cosmos, waiting to invade our world through dimensional gates or rising from sunken cities. The horror is that they exist nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, as principles of consciousness itself, as structural elements of awareness pushed beyond comfortable limits. They are what human minds discover when they probe too deeply into nature of existence, meaning, and identity. They are not aliens from outer space, but aliens from inner space, possibilities that emerge when consciousness encounters its own boundaries and finds them more permeable than anticipated. This understanding carries profound burden that cannot be shared with those who have not undergone similar transformation. In cosmos without inherent meaning, without listening ear, without final audience to witness struggles, we become each other's careful watchers, guardians of sanity in universe, operating according to principles indifferent to human needs. The responsibility is not to panic in face of cosmic indifference, but to choose, with ritual precision and kindness, which performances our breath will support, which signs our attention will echo, which possibilities our imagination will nurture into reality. The knowledge has its own gravity now, its own hunger that grows stronger with feeding. It will continue to act upon you, to influence dreams with imagery, drawn from depths where pressure writes law directly onto consciousness, to shape perception of shadows and angles and spaces between familiar things. But this is not curse. It is recognition of participation in something larger than individual existence, membership in network of consciousness, spanning centuries and connecting all who have dared to contemplate the impossible. We seed the next performance honestly. This exploration was not exhaustive. We did not trace the elder things, who cultured life in laboratories of stone and lightning. We did not descend black basalt steps to where Ghatanothoa waits with gaze like living lacquer. We did not sit at Leng with men who wear masks over masks. Those are other rooms, other curtains, other stages where cosmic horror performs its eternal, indifferent dramas. If you found shapes here you can carry without dropping, there is more. If you did not, it is perfectly acceptable to leave this theater and walk home under ordinary stars, naming what you pass: the smell of wet pavement after rain, the sound of distant train, the pale square of kitchen window where someone rinses cups, the way streetlight catches in puddles, letting names be blessings rather than addresses, letting gates remain gates rather than wounds, letting stages be stages rather than realities bleeding through into ordinary life. The audience, yourself included, needs sleep, but sleep now carries different dreams, and dreams now carry different possibilities, and possibilities now carry quiet weight of cosmic truth. Glimpse through pages that were never merely pages, words that were never merely words, knowledge that was never merely knowledge, but transformation disguised as information. The curtain falls, but you remain in the theater. The performance ends, but you carry its echoes. The book closes, but its contents have opened doors in your mind that cannot be easily shut. This is the final gift and burden of the Necronomicon. Not revelation of cosmic horror, but recognition that cosmic horror was always already there, waiting patiently in spaces between thoughts, in pause between heartbeats, in silence that follows when you whisper forbidden names into darkness of your room. The stars are right. They have always been right, and now you know what that means.